let's begin, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Martin Lindsay, board chair of the Culinary Historians of San Diego. We're a nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to educating people about the history of food and how it relates to culture and pretty much everything else. Membership benefits the San Diego Public Library's collections and helps us present presentations like this one, usually live at the auditorium at San Diego Public Library, the Downtown Central Public Library, every third Saturday of the month. So those are free public lectures. Eventually, like we were talking about, we'll be able to get back into the theater. But until then, yeah, fingers crossed. Until then, we're doing these on Zoom, learning experience for everybody. I think we got through our technical difficulties this morning, so we'll go on with that. Our next presentation will be online Saturday, March 20th, A Tale of Two Caesars, featuring me. I'll be talking about the history of Caesar salad, Caesar Cardini, and Caesar Pastori families. So that should be fun. We have attendees right now on mute for this large webinar. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A panel down at the bottom. You'll see that. And then we'll address them later. I'll ask her the questions that you've presented. Also, this presentation is being recorded and will be available soon on our YouTube channel and on our website, which is chsandiego.org. So, for as long as humans have been farming and tending the fields, they've shared a common problem: how to preserve fruits and vegetables. Making jam is one solution. Over the years, what began as a preservation method has evolved into a mealtime staple enjoyed for its many unique and delicious flavors, even when the produce is fresh and available. How long have people been making jams, and how does the process work? And how difficult is it for home cooks to make jam? Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Christina Sleeper, who will answer those very questions and more about the history of food preservation. Christina Sleeper is a Los Angeles chef, host, and entrepreneur, a professional caterer and event planner. She founded Sleeper's gourmet food company, which features her original recipe seasonings, jams, and teas, and can be found at sleepersgourmet.com. She's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati with a BA in Communications and Journalism, Master Food Preserver, Slow Food Preservation Advisor, and guest lecturer. Her first book, Jamming Through the Ages, will be published soon, very soon, or pretty soon. Soon as it can be. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Christina. Thank you for joining us.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, Martin, and everyone with the Culinary Historians of San Diego. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you to my home kitchen here in Los Angeles, California. Not the way I thought I would meet you all, but hey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Yes, this is so great, and I'm so glad that we have this opportunity, and I'm very excited to share one of my most delicious passions with all of you: jam making in all of its rich and flavorful history throughout the ages.
All right.
So, do you want me to just go right ahead and dive right in?
Sure. Please do. Please do. If you want to share your screen, go ahead. I think I have it set correctly for you to be able to do that.
Fantastic. For right now, I don't think that I'm going to need any screen sharing capabilities,
Okay.
but I will keep you posted because I do have all of my buttons on the ready here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop my video because no one needs to see my ugly mug while you present.
You stop. Well, I guess you'll be one of those little small squares up on the top, and we can just
Yeah.
we can just go ahead and get going. But well, before I get too much into the history of jam, I'm going to tell a little bit of my own personal jam history. I made my first jam, which was really more of a jelly, almost 30 years ago in Columbus, Ohio. I was a newlywed, and my husband's mother was an avid gardener and canner. Every time we stopped by their house in Ohio during the growing season, which in Ohio is roughly late spring to late fall, there was always a fresh, bountiful crop of something to eat from their garden. Everything from early vegetables like stringer peas, lettuces, rhubarb, tomatoes, and in the summer, bushels and bushels of blueberries and raspberries. I would always be amazed with the sheer volume their garden produced, and even more in awe of how my mother-in-law, Joan, tackled it all. You see, since I was a child, I've always had a passion for food stories and cooking techniques. I grew up in a town with a very diverse melting pot known as the International City, Lorain, Ohio, which is just outside of Cleveland. And I had friends whose mothers and grandmothers prepared many authentic ethnic cuisines, from Puerto Rican acapuquias to Eastern European pierogies, Italian handmade raviolis, and so many other foods. And I even got the chance as a child to help in the kitchens and learn these recipes personally. So I was very interested in talking with my mother-in-law and learning her food stories, and in this case, what she was putting up or canning and how she was, going to do it. Well, she was a true child of the Great Depression, so it was quite a production. Depending on the produce, she would expertly freeze, dry, or can the fruit or vegetable. And I would just watch and ask curious questions without getting my hands dirty, because she was really a one-woman show, and she handled every aspect of the preservation process, from the picking to the preparation to the cooking, jarring, and canning with effortless ease. I mean, nothing went to waste in that sleeper kitchen. Watching her, she made canning look so easy and actually fun. I'm not joking. She really did make it look fun. She really seemed to enjoy the entire process. And from my vantage point, I didn't get a sense of the true manual work that went into every single finished jar. Well, back to my first jam. My parents lived on a property with an acre of delicious Concord grapes near the coast of Lake Erie. My mom, being the exact opposite of my husband's mother, thought it was fine to just eat the grapes she wanted and then let the birds have the rest. She never had any interest in canning or preserving. I mean, I guess you could say she was a typical 1960s woman or housewife that was swayed by all of the modern conveniences. And she grew up with grueling farm chores. So once she escaped her parents' home, she didn't look back or feel the need to recreate any of that drudgery in her life when a perfectly good grocery store was right around the corner. Well, I looked at all of these plump, perfect grapes and decided I would preserve them. So I picked about a bushel of fruit and brought them to my mother-in-law and asked her if she would teach me how to make jam. She said, grapes make better jelly, so I'll teach you how to make jelly. I was so excited. I felt like I was going to learn magic. Well, we cleaned the grapes, popped them in a pot to soften them and simmer them with water. Then we poured the mixture into a jelly bag for straining. And once we had a pure, clear liquid, we put this mixture back in the pot with sugar, pectin, and a little bit of lemon juice and let it cook till it came to a boil, thickened, and then ultimately reached the gelling stage. When it was properly gelled, we ladled it into a prepared jar, applied the lids, and properly processed it in a water bath canner. When it was done, I wanted to eat it right away, and I did. It was truly delicious. I was so proud of this culinary creation, and also I now really understood the time and labor that goes into making jam from scratch. But you know what? That didn't stop me from sharing my creation with all of my friends and family. And I even won some bragging rights with my friends who were so impressed that I did this, because you got to remember, this was the 1990s and none of my peers had ever canned. That was a job that was left for someone else's grandma. Well, from that moment on, I was hooked on jam making, and I've been making my own jams, jellies, preserves, marmalades, conserves, and fruity sauces ever since. So that's my story. Now let's delve into a spoonful of the history of jam. This sweet spread, jam, which we now know in many variations and forms, has been savored by humans for thousands of years, from ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans to the present day. It's given courage to Joan of Arc, been the secret love potion of Nostradamus, aided stomach aches of queens, and warded off the scurvy of sailors at sea. It's been served at the feast table of kings and given strength and sustenance to soldiers. And finally, with the increased accessibility and invention of canning, it's become a delicacy that has been affordably enjoyed by everyone. So, jam has three basic components. It's got a sweetener, a pectin, and a fruit. And depending on the optimal acidity, it will also get a little bit of lemon juice. Now, this is one of the most ancient forms of food preservation that dates back thousands and thousands of years. Beginning with drying, freezing, and salt curing, the discovery of food preservation techniques is what has helped our early civilizations stop being nomadic and actually settle. One of the earliest versions of jam dates back at least 9,000 years to the ancient Egyptians. From excavations and hieroglyphics, we've learned that they were avid beekeepers. And in their care of bees, they discovered that honey could be used for many medicinal, dietary, and even embalming purposes. And many of these uses are still in popular practice today. My grandmother was a beekeeper. And I have to tell you, from when I was a child, she treated everything with a teaspoon of sugar, from my colds and sore throats to little cuts. But back to Egypt. While excavating the pyramids in Georgia about 1500, or actually not 1500, 15 years ago, archaeologists found pots stained with honey in the tomb of a noble woman that dated back approximately 5,000 years. Now, that's 2,000 years before the findings in King Tut's tomb, which had dated at approximately 3,000 years ago. So I think about this and I want to ask you, do you think that these archaeologists sampled the honey directly from the tomb with a spoon, or did they wait until they got back to base camp and spread it on toast? I'm just kidding. Either way, I'm sure it was, yummy. So what about honey makes it truly last forever? Well, it's chemistry, really. Honey is purely a sugar, and sugars are hygroscopic, which means they contain very little water. And because of this low moisture, honey creates an atmosphere where nothing can survive. Bacteria and microorganisms are basically suffocated and literally die. And when you add in the factor that honey is extremely acidic with a pH between 3 and 4.5, you reduce the chance of any potential spoilers trying to make a home in the honey pot. And additionally, when bees regurgitate the honey into a comb, an enzyme called glucose oxidase is created. This is when the real alchemy of honey occurs, because these enzymes break down glucose sugars and generate hydrogen peroxide, which acts as a natural antiseptic. So aside from being nature's first Band-Aid, this sticky sweet nectar creates an optimal environment for preservation, which is another reason why honey was commonly used for embalming. So, while the Egyptian sample is not necessarily a jam as we know it, these pots that were filled with honey and bits of dates and figs are considered to be some of the very first candies. So if you're looking for someone to blame your sweet tooth on, blame King Tut. All right. When we move a bit forward in time, we find more examples of fruit being kept or preserved in honey. It was quite a common practice by the time we look to ancient Greece. The Greeks would take quince, dry it slightly, mix it into honey, and then pack it into jars. This fruit, quince, was very important to the Greeks. It's believed that the fruit originated on the island of Crete, and quince once played a very important role in wedding celebrations and was offered as a gift to be shared with new brides and grooms. They associated this fruit with fertility, and because of its association, the quince has become known as the fruit of love, marriage, and fertility. Perhaps this is why the quince is often depicted as the true forbidden fruit from the Garden of Eden described in the book of Genesis. Even though a red apple is often seen in art, this fruit is not common in this region until much later. Moving through time, we get to the ancient Romans and actually find one of our first real examples of jam that is very closely resembling the jam as we know it today. The Romans advanced the jamming process by cooking quince and honey together, melding the ingredients into a preserve, which by definition is a jam with uniform or whole pieces of fruit, but nowadays it's often used interchangeably to describe all jams. Well, this basic recipe is often attributed to Marcus Apicius, a Roman gourmand and lover of luxury who lived during the 1st century AD and is attributed in the first known cookbook, which is a collection of Roman recipes known as Apicius, but it's widely and commonly referred to as De Re Cucinaria, or the art of cooking. This cookbook dates to the late 4th or early 5th century, and it included early jam recipes using figs, apples, plums, cherries, pears, and quinces preserved in honey. And no, this is not Apicius, but it is ancient in its own right because it's the culinary journal of my husband's great grandmother. And it's really a treasure in our family of old recipes because they change so much over time. Now, you might be wondering when sugar enters this tasty journey. Well, it's believed that cane sugar was first introduced and used by man in ancient Polynesia about 3,500 years ago. And it eventually spread to India and then to Persia, where it was called, the reed, which makes honey without bees, by Emperor Darius around 500 BC. The reed, which makes honey without bees. That's how they referred to sugarcane. Well, Emperor Darius held sugar as a closely guarded secret until he was able to turn the finished product into a product that he could export for a hefty profit, because sugar was money. And it took another 1,000 years for the Arabs to break the secret code of refining sugar. And with their conquering of northern Africa and Spain, they established major sugar production in the region. Now, sugar finally made its way into Western Europe as a result of the Crusades in the 11th century. And with that, jam's popularity as a delicacy started to take off. These crusades returned home with recipes and complex, delicious concoctions from the Middle East that used what they called the new spice. The new spice. Sugar was first recorded in England in 1099, and even though for more than almost 200 years it wasn't cheap, there's a record from like 1319 that states that sugar in London sold for 2 shillings a pound, which is roughly $50 a pound in today's money. So I think you can see why it was not for the common people. So because of this expensive commodity in sugar, jams and preserves and other sugar-based candies and fruits were only enjoyed and savored by royalty and the very wealthy. And really, they were even savored by them. So who were these royals and noble jam-loving historical people? Well, there was Joan of Arc, who allegedly ate quince jam before going into battle, and she believed it actually filled her with courage. So she ate a ton of this stuff. She really felt empowered by the jam. And then also we have Nostradamus, who famously is remembered today for his prophecies. But he loved the sweet stuff so much that he wrote an entire book on the subject called Tratada de las Confituradas, or the Treatise of Makeup and Jam, which included everything from recipes and tips for things like hair dyes to love potion jams, which he claimed, if passed from mouth to mouth, would strike a woman with a burning of her heart to perform the love act. Now that's hot. Seriously, though. Now I get to talk a little bit about Mary, Queen of Scots. She's an interesting figure in this sweet story because some attribute the word marmalade to her. You see, Mary, as legend tells us, was prone to seasickness during her travels from France and to England. So her physician mixed pots of orange and crushed sugar together for her to ingest to keep her seasickness at bay. Well, the French would say, Marie est malade, or Marie is sick, which can loosely be translated to the word marmalade. However, when we remember the Portuguese had quince fruit hundreds of years before this and made a concoction called marmelo, which means quince conserve, that predates Mary, I think it's far more likely that the term marmalade derives from a Portuguese origin. And also, the earliest recipes for marmalade are exclusively quince, and not citrus, as we most commonly know marmalades today. Now, while I'm also mentioning the ancient golden apple quince again, I want to say that this fruit finally made its way into English gardens around the year of our Lord, 1200. And the earliest medieval recipes for quince jam are called chardon quince. And they were made with equal parts quince, honey, and then a little bit of ginger was added to the pot, and then it was boiled until it thickened. Then they packed it into a little box where they would let it sit for a period of time, and it would harden up, and ultimately they would cut up chunks of this and serve it. And I'm sure you know the name of this, but this style of a firm marmalade is also known as quince cheese, or in Portugal, they call it membrillo. Moving on to France and King Louis, who was a great lover of all things served in lavish pots. He had quite the royal sweet tooth and demanded that all of his magnificent feasts ended with marmalades, jellies, and candied fruits served in elaborate dishes with little silver spoons. It was actually a common practice to have for your dessert just a teaspoon or two of these special jams and preserves, and that was enough to satisfy their sweet tooth. Well, each jam delicacy that was served at Versailles was made with fruit that was grown in the king's own gardens and glass houses. He grew everything. Depending on the season, His guests were treated to the most exotic flavors available and foods that you could hardly imagine at that time. He even grew pineapples. These feasts were really legendary. Now, by the time we get into the 1700s, the price of sugar finally became somewhat affordable to the common person. And this is definitely what helped Napoleon Bonaparte set his place and secure it in history of jams with a very important part of mainstream history. You see, until a little more than 200 years ago, people were only able to preserve foods by drying, smoking, salting, cooking with sugar, or simply storing root vegetables and grains in a dark cellar or building. And although these methods had worked for some 60,000 odd years, they preserved the food in a state that did not resemble its fresh form. So to savor something fresh, you grew it and you ate it immediately. Now, so strangely enough, the next major advancement in food preservation was developed in the pursuit of military conquest. In the late 1700s, soldiers in foreign lands mostly lived off of whatever kind of food they could steal, pillage, forage, or buy, which wasn't much, and starvation crippled countless military campaigns. It's very well written that many soldiers and many wars were lost because the soldiers were starving. Now, Napoleon's most important desire was to feed his armies and keep them strong. He said, "An army travels on its stomach." And he knew that all the brilliant military strategies in the world that he could devise were worth nothing if his troops couldn't eat well and keep healthy and stay strong for battle. Well, this led him to offer a prize to anyone who could devise a safe and reliable way to preserve the food the soldiers needed. And in 1795, Napoleon created the Food Preservation Prize and offered a 12,000 franc reward, a fortune, to anyone who could develop a method of preserving large quantities of food. Well, 15 years later, chef and confectioner Nicholas Appert claimed the prize. Appert observed that food cooked inside a glass jar didn't spoil unless its seal leaked. So he devised a method to preserve a wide variety of foods in sealed bottles because he surmised that if it worked for wine bottles, it would work on other containers. And so he jarred everything from soups, vegetables, juices, dairy products, jellies, jams, and syrups by filling the jars completely and topping them with a cork, sealing that cork with wax, and then boiling it in water. The same basic technology known as water bath canning, which is still used today to can and preserve foods. Now, Louis Pasteur's research, which provided the scientific basis for Appert's empirical discoveries by identifying the role of microbes in food spoilage and eliminating them, would take another century to be validated. And well, I think you know that we all know this process as pasteurization. All right, now, in case you're wondering when the new America finally got its taste for the sweet stuff, it likely arrived here. How funny is this? It likely arrived here with the European colonists who brought their own recipes with them. The first book noting a jam making recipe appeared in this country in the 17th century. And not having a ready supply of sugar, they actually used molasses, honey, and maple sugar to preserve the fruit and sweeten the taste. Now, I can also introduce another famous character into my jam pod at this time by the name of John Chapman. This man is a fellow Ohioan, better known by the name Johnny Appleseed. Johnny apprenticed as an orchardist with an apple grower in the early 1800s. And he noted the Western migration pattern of pioneers and decided to plant apple trees everywhere so that people could make cider and jam. Now, one of the earliest pioneers who we still recognize today was Jerome Smucker, who opened a cider mill in the late 1890s in Oroville, Ohio, and he actually used fruit planted by Johnny Appleseed. Now, before long, Mr. Smucker and his enterprising wife were churning out apple butter made in copper kettles over a wood stove and jarring it in stoneware crocks, which they sold from the back of their horse-drawn wagon throughout that area of Ohio. And well, I mean, Smucker's, their company is still here, and it is still run by direct descendants of Jerome. And currently that jam pot is worth about $700 million. Now, another important discovery made from apples was pectin. Germans discovered that if they boiled apple peel, it created a broth-like substance that could be used as a thickening agent. And so they started, thickening up their sauces and jams with it. But we have to give a hand again to the ingenuity of Americans, because Americans are the ones who patented this pectin making process in the early 1900s and spawned the entire commercial pectin industry. Little jars you can get for home canning. All right, now, after all this talk of chemistry, I think it's not going to come as a surprise to you that I can introduce Marie Curie, one of the history's greatest chemists and discoverer of radium, into this story. Well, Marie was an avid jam maker, and her home journals were filled with seasonal entries of fruit for making jam. And it was during the summer of 1898 when she discovered polonium. She also found herself putting up a batch of gooseberry jelly, and her recipe called for 8 pounds of fruit, 8 pounds of sugar, and after she thickened it, it made about 14 pots of jelly. Also in the 1800s, we get to meet a doctor by the name of Welch, who grew very fond of the grape that I used in my very first jam. Now, initially, this grape was bred for the perfectly cool climate of Concord, Massachusetts. So Dr. Welch decided to use this fruit to launch a grape juice company. And by the early 1900s, he'd added his first jam product to his company, and he called it Grapeolade or Grapeolade or Grapeolade or Grapeade. I always say that wrong. He added the Grapeade to his line. Well, during World War II, the US Army bought the company, the Welch Company's entire inventory of Grapeolade and shipped it to France for the soldiers. And when the war ended and the troops returned back home, they demanded Grapeolade, and Welch's signature grape product came to the commercial market in the 1920s, and it's still the top seller today. It's everyone's favorite, and it's like on all probably 7 out of 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that will be made today. So in the last 100 years, we've seen the industrial age revolutionize every aspect of food from farm to table. Now, during World War II, it was important to be self-sufficient, and keeping a victory garden and canning the produce were seen as acts of ultimate patriotism in support of our troops. And as I mentioned, my mother-in-law was born of the Great Depression, so she was a child during this war. So she learned canning, victory gardening, and being self-sufficient from her mother. Well, once the war was over, our manufacturing switched from weapon making to other mass productions like refrigerators. And this signaled to the average homemaker to embrace a new way of storing and preparing food. Now, with the ability to go to the local grocery store and buy commercially canned products, home canning dropped more than 50% in the United States during this post-World War II time. And it didn't see a revival until the back to nature period of the late 70s that also saw the introduction to home canning aficionados of the pressure canner, which could be used for preserving low acid foods like vegetables. So canning tomatoes at home became a much safer thing to do. So today, we're living in one of the most abundant, creative times for home and commercial canning, with so many individuals and companies creating an array of delectable artisan products like me. It's no wonder that that we're now seeing jams made of wildly exotic concoctions. And you know, I mean, I've got some crazy stuff here with peppers and nuts and watermelon. And I wish all of you were here in my home kitchen so that I could share some of these flavors with you. But for now, I hope that I've satisfied a little bit of your sweet tooth with my Jamming Through the Ages story. And I look forward to answering all of your questions as best as I can. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
I see we have several questions here.
Okay. Are you going to read them, or do I need to look at them?
I can read them to you. A couple people raised their hands. If you do have a question, folks, just go ahead and put them down into the Q&A section, and we'll get to them. Bruce says, I cut my teeth, so to speak, on Smucker's, Welch's, and Knott's Berry Farm. I guess those would be considered the Starbucks of the jelly world.
Oh my
I
goodness, he's
enjoy
right.
the many evolved iterations of jelly. However, I remain a neophyte. I've never been clear as to the difference between jam, jelly, conserve, preserve, and marmalade. Is it merely semantics?
It's more than semantics. What was the gentleman's name?
Bruce.
Bruce. Hi, Bruce. It's more than semantics, and I will show you a teeny bit of what I mean by that here. Starting with jelly. Jelly is actually made by extracting the fruit and using only its juice. And so it's just a liquid with the sugar and the pectin. When you move on to jam or preserve, jam actually has, see, I'm sure I have one here. Jam actually has pieces of fruit in the sugar, and they can be whole pieces or they can be chopped up, and it really depends upon what flavor that you're going to be making. When you move on to conserves, conserves are a preserve that's had nuts and raisins added to it, and sometimes alcohol. And then when you get to marmalades, as we know them today, and if you remember from the story, marmalades were always quince, but now they're almost always citrus. And a marmalade actually has suspended pieces of citrus throughout, and you can actually see that in many different brands. So a marmalade will have, ribbons or chunks of citrus throughout its preparation. And then if you go to sauces, a sauce is kind of like a jam that's a lot looser. And so you're not going to typically have the gelatinous quality that you have in a jam from the pectin, because oftentimes when we make sauces, we don't need to add pectin to give it body. How's that? Did I count them all, or did I forget one of them?
I'm thinking of two other terms. What about chutney and compote?
Okay, so chutney is actually made with spicy items. So a chutney typically has ginger, spice, and much stronger aromatic than you would find in a marmalade. And then did you say conserve? No, you said it's a whole fruit. What you just mentioned, the
compote.
A compote is typically a whole fruit.
Okay. All right. I also saw somebody say, is mincemeat preserve?
Mincemeat.
Is mincemeat a conserve? That was in the chat.
Mincemeat would fall into the category of conserve because it does have nuts and raisins in what we know as a typical mincemeat now, and often apples. Older mincemeats were minced meat that were old, that they actually sweetened up to make them more palatable with, with the fruits and the nuts.
Barbara asks, on the subject of preservation, is honey used in the manufacture in the cosmetic industry?
What was that?
Honey used in cosmetics.
Is honey used in cosmetics? Yeah. I don't know much about cosmetic manufacturing. However, I can tell you, this is just my own little personal tip for you little home missing your masks and your facial people. You can actually take honey from the jar and you can put it on your face for about 10 minutes. And because of its antiseptic and drying qualities, it will firm up and soften your face. And I've done it before. And so I can say you can use it in a cosmetic way, but I don't know about commercial preparations.
Okay. Peter asks, when was jam first spread on toasted bread?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question, Peter. That makes me have to answer a question about baking, because baking and everyone having the ability to have bread became, I want to say it was sometime between like the 1400s and the 1700s when you would have wood-fired ovens, and people had the ability to get these flour and grain products to be making bread. But remember, jam was still really expensive at that time. So a common person would probably just have a hunk of bread and maybe some fresh churned butter, which would be considered very sweet at that time. So I'll have to look that up to know exactly when we spread it on bread. I'm not sure.
All right.
Because as I mentioned, and if I breeze by it, I want to say again, even during the times of King Louis, which was the 15th, 16th century, jam was served in beautiful little pots for the guests, and also with little spoons. And it was a delicacy even to the most wealthy and rich royals. So for a common person to grab that Smucker's and Welch's and spread it on bread, I'm gonna say, I'm guessing it hasn't been being done for more than 150 or so years, because jam was really considered a very special dessert, not the common condiment like we see it today.
Right. Roxanne asks, is there a difference between dry candied fruit and really dry preserves?
Dried candied fruit and dried preserves. Well, I mentioned one, which is the membrillo. And membrillo, because it is almost like, it's like a hunk. If you've never seen it, it is really moisture free, and you can cut it like cheese and eat it almost like candy, or even like a jelly. Some people will make like jelly candies. And I would say that yes, you can do it with the quince, you can do it with guava, you can do it with fruits that have very high pectin quality, because the pectin is the stabilizer, and the pectin will actually make certain fruits, especially with that already have like a high propensity of the pectin in them, quince, apples, pears, guavas, very tight and like a candy. Now, as far as jellied candied, or like say if we're talking about candied orange rinds or candied lemon, those can be done a couple of different ways. You can dehydrate them in your oven or with a dehydrator, and then sprinkle them with sugar. And when you extract their moisture, you condense the flavor that's actually in the peel. So that's what makes them, so yummy and like a candy. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes. Roxanne also asks, was the hot water canning process used for jams before 1800?
Water bath canning was invented by Louis Appert, and so it was 1795 that Napoleon issued the proclamation where he would pay someone 12,000 francs if they could come up with a way to preserve food to feed the soldiers. And so it took 15 years. So that's 1810 when we were using water bath canning for the first time. So only a little over 200 years ago.
All right. Deborah asks, is it expensive to get started with making jelly and jam?
To get started, to make a little batch for your family, you need 3 ingredients and a pot. You need fruit, you need sugar, you need pectin, and depending on what fruit you're using, you're going to need an acid. Now, I have this lemon here because it visually makes my point, but I will tell you that if you're going to be doing a jam making at home and your recipe, always use a qualified recipe, always use a recipe that's certified through our National Food Board, but it's best to use a commercially made lemon juice product because the pH is controlled in that, and it varies from lemon to lemon. So, so you need those 3 things, and you need a pot. And I could whip some up here today in the kitchen, but maybe we'll save that for another time. But really, you can have a nice little pot of homemade jam in less than an hour. And it's, look for something that's fresh, look for something that's in season. And if you want to just experiment, I have to say my favorite preservation method, a lot of people don't think of it as preservation, but it is. And it keeps food in its best quality, nutritious, and appearance state, and that's frozen food. So if you wanted to make raspberry jam today and raspberries really aren't in season, go to your local grocery store and pick up a couple bags of frozen raspberries, and you can use those.
All right. I think people need to keep in mind keeping everything nice and sanitary and clean
Right.
when they're doing that. Because
the most important thing that you need to worry about is, you need to keep your work area very clean. You need to practice good hygiene. So, wash your hands. And if you touch your phone, wash them again. It's something that I teach people as a master food preserver. I've made jams with groups of people many times. So, your phone is very dirty. So I know you want to take pictures of that cool little pot of jam, but don't do it. Or if you're going to touch it, you need to wash your hands again. The other thing to remember about jam, as I mentioned, sugar in just about any of its forms is one of the best natural preservatives. That's why it was found in the tombs of Egypt and used for embalming. So, unless you do not practice safe canning methods, which is a water-based canning method, there are things out there on the World Wide Web, people, that say you can take your jars, turn them upside down, and that'll create a seal, or you can heat them in the oven. And there's been quite a few jam catastrophes in recent months over very prominent jam makers who have touted these very unsafe practices that do not use a water bath canning method. And I will tell you that if you want to keep this and give it to your friends, you need to process your jars for the minimum that's required in the recipe, which is typically 10 minutes. If you're not going to do that, just put it in a container and keep it in your refrigerator and eat it within a couple weeks. That said, it's sugar.
Right.
And unless you take your spoon and double dip, you're not going to get a contaminant in this jar. Typically, all the contamination that ruins a jar of jam comes from human error, late night snacking.
All right. Question from Joyce. What about lekvar?
Lekvar?
Lekvar. Don't know.
I'm not familiar with the word. Is it a sugar that's like a sugar substitute or something? I don't know.
Let's somebody look that up.
Go ahead, somebody. I mean, you want me to grab my phone and Google that for you?
In the meantime,
wait, hold on a second. I'm hearing from my peanut gallery. What did you say, Mark? What is it?
Hungarian prune or apricot.
Hey, Hungarian prune or apricot, lekvar? If I could get my hands on them, I'd put them into jars. I swear to God, I would. They sound yummy. I have made jams in, I've made more than 50 different preparations of jam. I've probably made 10 different strawberry varieties. I have right now on my website at sleepersgourmet.com 2 different peach. I do things with peppers. So I've got my serrano and my jalapenos in this one. Here's a conserve I did with pear. It's not currently in stock, but it was really yummy. I added some alcohol to it. Yeah, so all different kinds. So yeah, grab those Hungarian prunes, and if you can't preserve them, freeze them.
Yeah. Deborah asks, can agave be used as a sweetener substitute for jam making?
You can use agave, you can use honey. I do not. I use pure cane sugar in all of my products because they are the most shelf stable for my commercial needs. But there are recipes that that use both of those, and you can even do low sugar jams with less pure cane sugar, or even with sugar substitutes. So what I will say is this, and I'm going to grab it from the back. This book here is by Ball, and it is a home preservation Bible. You can get it on Amazon, but I would say for any home canner or anyone who's interested in canning, there's a lot of maybe prettier books with better pictures or more pictures, but this is in my opinion, the gold standard for any beginner.
Okay. EU says there was a block of paraffin in my grandma's pantry when she died. I've read in the late 19th century recipes that jars were sealed with either a piece of paper soaked in brandy and sugar or a layer of beeswax or paraffin. When did that become a thing to do? Glass jars and lids were available by then.
Well, I think because if you were able to talk to your great grandmother, she would say, well, that's the way we've always done it. And what happened was, yes, now we can get commercial home canning jars. And I'll get one out. We can get, commercial home canning jars in many sizes. And then, I use a commercial jar with a commercial lug lid. Well, here's the thing, kids. Even though we can get these now, back in the 40s or 50s or 60s, when your grandma was making jam, she was living with that World War II Depression mentality where she saved everything, and getting something in a glass jar, she looked for ways to reuse it. And she would often fill it with her jam and put the wax in it for the seal. Now, that is, it's not ancient, but I mentioned that in my talk, that's what Louis Appert figured out. If you can seal wine in bottles, why can't we seal other foods? And so he took other size glass containers, and he put the foods in it, filled it with wax, and put a cork on top of it, and then sealed it again on the outside and processed it in the water bath canner. So using the wax, the paraffin, my mother-in-law used it. She moved away from it. I don't know when. She's, sadly not here for me to ask these questions, but I remember seeing the paraffin in her cupboard, and she said, oh yeah, that's what we used to use for sealing the jars, but now I have my ball jars, because in the 90s, she was able to get the ball jars in the quantity that she needed. So.
And even sometimes, if you think about it, the lids you can buy separately if the other ones are all worn out or you've lost. But they're rusty.
These jars, I think, I'll have to be corrected, but I believe that this jar will last like 10 years as long as you don't see any sort of cracks or anything in it. It's tempered to withstand water baths and also pressure canning, which is even at a higher temperature. And as long as you have like a smooth top to the jar, you can just buy rings and lids and just keep using this jar. You cannot reuse lids, but you can reuse rings.
Right.
Everybody knows the difference, right? I have one, I can get it out.
Kathy asks, how nutritious is jam if there's so much sugar in them? Somebody else says it's a sweet treat and have little other nutritional use, possibly some vitamin C.
Okay, so that answers that question. And as I mentioned, you know, it is sugar, because we can get sugar today in the massive quantities that we can get it in, and every product has added sugar, because what sugar does is it cuts down the bitterness of other foods. So manufacturers use sugar in everything. Now, I use pure cane sugar, and I will not make any excuses for it, because here's what I believe. I believe in moderation, just like Marie Antoinette and King Louis. Have a little bit of jam, enjoy it, savor it, put a teaspoon of it on your ice cream. Don't feel bad about it, but you don't need to take a bath in it.
Right. Jude asks, what is your favorite jam and why?
Oh my gosh. What is my favorite jam and why?
Okay. Only one.
I'm going to just say this. I feel like my jams are my babies. And when I get an idea to make a new jam and it turns out, I feel like I just had a baby. I had this little sweet baby. And I mean, like this here, okay, this is a new thing I came up with last year. It's Pickle Melon. It's kind of has the quality of like sushi ginger, and you can put it on all different things. It's not too sweet. And I was so excited when I had that, because I was in my commercial kitchen and I was making a batch of watermelon jam, which I really love. It tastes like Jolly Ranchers. But I mean, honestly, I feel like Willy Wonka some days, and I love that feeling. I love I love what the chemistry does to fruit, and it transforms it, and you can use it on more things than your toast. You know, we glaze fish, we glaze meats, we put it on breads. I make cookies. I do many cocktail concoctions, and I have a full blog on my website at sleepersgourmet.com, and you can check that out. But I guess if I had to pick one baby, I would pick who I had open and I tasted during the show, and I call this Tangerine Love, and it's classified as a marmalade because it's a citrus, but it's really more like a jam. And what I did was I took these, you know, tree ripened satsumas, and I melded them with whole vanilla beans and let them cook down until they're in this like it's like a golden amber that almost reminds me of honey. Like, can you see that? Like ancient honey. And then when it's almost done, I add California sparkling wine or champagne. And I have this on salmon. I will put it with my seasonings, and it's a beautiful glaze. We put it on ice cream, on toast. But I mean, really, sometimes when I just have a little sweet tooth, I have a little spoonful, just like Marie Antoinette.
All right. Peter says he's been making jams from the 1960s and he's never really needed to use pectin. And is it necessary, really?
Here's the thing, Peter. Many people don't use pectin. It depends upon the fruit that you start with, because all fruits have a varying quality of natural pectin. But typically what happens when people don't use pectin is they have to really cook and reduce their pot of jam for a long period of time. And I like to capture the freshest possible flavor in my jams. So I don't cook my jams much beyond its boiling point. And I do use a commercial pectin product to give it that slight thickness. every jam is slightly different. And so some of them are thicker, some of them are not as thick. And I would say that you're fine to not add pectin. Maybe you're using some of your mother's or your grandmother's older recipes, but look up some recipes and give it a try. Maybe just do a side by side. If you do strawberry jam, do a strawberry jam the way you've been doing it, and do it again with a little bit of pectin and see if the flavor's brighter to you.
I guess not necessary, but to each their own.
It really, yeah. You know, if you're just making jam, like I say, you just came upon a bushel of strawberries and you just want to make jam, and you're just keeping it in your fridge or for yourself, and you don't mind it to be on that runny consistency, because everybody does like a different consistency. You know, with jellies, I mean, look, this is jelly. This is a commercial jelly, and you can see it's thick. This has pectin in it.
Right.
So, and grapes also have natural pectin. So it's a personal preference, really.
And speeds up the manufacturing process.
It speeds up the manufacturing, and it also captures food at its most bright taste, because the longer you cook something, if you remember from in my talk, I talked about preservation methods and how they had to salt, or, you know, whatever they had to do with their foods, it changes the consistency. So the food looks darker. The food doesn't really resemble its natural state as well as it does when it's not boiled for so long. I mean, think about broccoli.
Yeah. Joyce says, when my grandmother made grape jelly in Southwest Ohio in the 1950s, she always melted paraffin and put it on top of the jelly before closing the lids.
Yes, that too.
And then some people say you don't need wax when water bath processing, but that's...
I mean, I don't know exactly what was the practice. I would have to do research on what was advised by Ball and other of our national, food advisors on canning. But I will tell you this, the wax equates to headspace. And everything that you can needs to have a different headspace. Typically with a home, and here's what I'm talking about with headspace. You see these bands around here? This is different headspace. So if I was doing a pickle, I would probably have about an inch of headspace. When I'm doing a jam, I want about 1/4 of an inch of headspace. So depending on, like, say grandma wanted to give as many jars away as possible, she could do that less headspace for the jam and fill it with wax. And then you could just pop that wax out, and it's still good. But again, it goes to conservation and just being efficient and sharing with as many people as possible, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And going back to the Lekvar, Joyce says,
Hungarian prune, do you have them, Joyce? I'm going to come get them. Do you grow them? No, I'm just joking.
called prune butter, a staple of Eastern European Jewish kitchen, normally found in the supermarkets in Hungary. So,
yum. I make lots of butters. I make an apple butter, and as I mentioned, the pear, it's a butter consistency as well. And what happens when you're making a butter, which is another one of our jams in the category, I missed that one when I got through. I was like, I'm missing one. It was butters. Butters are typically made with fruits that have very high pectin qualities, and they rarely get a pectin added to it. So you will make it with apples, pears, peaches, I guess prunes. I'm really excited to find that. I'm going to look for it in a local store.
Yeah.
And they also are some of the lowest sugar confections in this category.
Anthony asks, what about jams made without additional sweeteners? Is there some other process necessary to make this preparation work without sweeteners?
Well, you'll have, if you want it to be a jam, it's going to need some sort of sweetener. So whether that's, honey, agave, or sorbitol, or pure cane sugar, if you don't add that to the mix, you're just going to end up with a fruit slurry or sauce, and that's fine. My grandma used to can cherries, and she canned cherries just in water. And you can buy, cherries like that at Trader Joe's and some other places. But to me, I didn't have a big sweet tooth as a kid, and these canned cherries in water were one of my favorite treats.
There you go. And then last thing is, when your book is released, they're asking me to please advise the members of Culinary Historians of San Diego by email when your book is released.
Oh, great. Yes. And I'm happy to come back. And, I just want to say to everyone who's here, I do a live cooking show every Saturday from my sleeper kitchen. And I've typically been doing it on Facebook or Instagram. So please look at Sleepers Gourmet on Facebook or Instagram, or go to my website and, follow me, get on my email list, and I'll let you know. I'll be back in this kitchen next Saturday, and hopefully some of you can join me. And I thank you for asking about my book and giving me that push. The pandemic put me a little bit on the to say we've all been derailed is really an understatement.
So yeah, we'll keep everybody informed as we learn more. Well, I wanted to thank you again for joining us. It's been really fun. Actually,
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I see a couple people raised their hands.
Well, let's get those questions in.
Let's see here. What do we do here? Where are you raised hand?
Now I can see the chat. Okay, great.
Okay. Where do we got? Barbara. Okay. Barbara. Asked to unmute.
And what does she ask?
She's muted right now.
Okay. Is she in? I just turned
here. I'm here.
Okay, yeah, Barbara.
Yeah.
You had your hand raised?
Oh, I didn't. I earlier said, just wanted to say Christina did a great job, and I love the use of her props.
Oh, thank you. That's the actor in me, with the problems that we were having with the technical issues. I said, hey, wait a second, I can pantomime.
There we go.
Excellent.
Okay. I see Daryl has his hand up. We'll do Daryl and Daryl. You're muted now.
I wanted to ask about the origin of Smucker's story about using John Chapman's apples. John Chapman didn't believe in grafting apples. He sold seedlings, and most of those were completely unsuitable for eating because the primary concern was making hard apple cider. So I'm kind of curious, where that came from.
Well, apple cider, yes, he wanted to make it so that the pioneers would be able to have apple cider and apple butter. And apple butter, as you know, is much tartar and much less sweet than what we would think of a jam. And so these apples were used at that time. I'm from Ohio, and that was the story we learned, that the Smucker family used the apples that were planted by John Chapman or Johnny Appleseed. But I will tell you this, the palate has definitely evolved. So what we may consider bitter and really unpalatable today. If you go back to the 1800s, when people didn't have sugar in everything, they probably still liked that flavor and having something slightly different done with that fruit besides drinking it. I love apple cider I love apple cider and hard cider.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for joining us as well. And thank you for your informative talk. It's been great.
I
and
look
we'll
forward
be
to
having-
coming back and talking with you again.
Yeah, we'll be having another one next month again about the history of the Caesar salad. So if you haven't, go ahead and reserve your spot for that as well. And if you enjoy this talk, you can go over to our website, chsandiego.org, and you can become a member. Any kind of membership dues also help the San Diego Library, which does need a little bit of help now. It's been closed for so long. Hopefully everything will be open up here pretty soon again. And thank you all for coming. And we'll see you all next month. And thank you, Christina, once again.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there. Wear your masks.
Thank you, everyone.
Jam on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.